Greetings, fellow Planeswalkers.
I'm James.
And I'm Paul.
And you're listening to the newest episode of the Commander-at-Arms podcast. This week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about questions we've seen from newer players, such as how the stack works to how triggers resolve when it's not your turn. We won't be discussing more complicated interactions here, such as how many creatures are on the battlefield after you resolve a kicked Rite of Replication on your Precursor Golem, but more so things that come up frequently in every echelon of Magic, from casual to hyper-competitive, and especially in Commander. But before we get into all of that, which seems like an absolute truck ton of information to get through, we're going to do our upkeep trigger, and I'm going to personally thank every single patron that we have. You guys definitely help to keep our lights on in here, keep me having an internet connection, and also helping us create more content for your ears and your eyes. If you want to become a patron on our Patreon and support us directly, you can do that at patreon.com/commanderatarms. So Paul, have you had anything interesting come in the mail, or have you found anything in any of your boxes as you've been slinking through them like a dungeoneer?
Unfortunately, nothing particularly spicy for me this week.
Oh, man.
I have taken a little bit of a break from purchasing things. I bought that set booster box of Dungeons & Dragons, and I haven't really done anything since, which, if you haven't seen that on YouTube yet, go ahead and give that a watch, give it a like, give it a view, give us a sub on there. Ring the bell, all the stuff, the things for the YouTube algorithm and whatnot.
So you and I actually got into a quick discussion about what some of the reprints were in those decks when we were doing last week's episode about, what are some cards you should add to those decks. And I found some pretty spicy cards that I needed to pick up. So I managed to pick up the Phantasmal Image, which I believe came out of the Aura of Courage deck, which is the Bant colored, it's not a dungeon deck, it's a Aura is an equipment deck.
There you go, you got there.
Yeah, I got there in the end. I wanted to say dungeon deck so much because I've played against Sephiroth a lot lately, and that's the main precon that I've played against. So yeah, I picked up the Phantasmal Image. I picked up there was a Rishkar's Expertise that I picked up, as well as something else that it's so bad that I can't remember what I picked up either. But I think the spiciest thing that I picked up was I was playing Daretti, and it's got Tron in it because obviously I just wanted to make a butt ton of colorless mana. So I put Tron in there, which is Urza's Mine, Power Plant, and Tower. And I did go and buy the original printing from 5th edition white bordered versions of those cards. So I'm really excited to see those ones come in the mail.
Disgusting.
You are. So last weekend, so we usually record on a Monday, and last weekend was a really big weekend for the Commander-at-Arms guys here, which is us, for content. We did a Friday Night Magic games on our server, and then Paul and I were actually invited on the Command the Cause server with Jake and Chris, who we had on the podcast, I think it was about 2 weeks ago now. If you haven't checked out that episode, go and check out that episode. There's some really cool guys. Get to know them and their cause. We got to play some Magic with them, slink some spells, and also raise funds for, I believe it was cancer research, or it was something to do with cancer, which was really cool.
I think they may actually, if I remember correctly, I think they're switching the foundation that they're donating to soon. So if you did want to participate in their current foundation, I would head on over to their Discord as soon as possible, ask for some more information from them.
Yeah, most definitely. Or go to the website commandthecause.org. All of the links to their socials and their website will be in the show notes of that episode. So go check out that episode and go check out the show notes. Go check them out. Donate to them. Follow them. Like them. Go check out their Discord. They are awesome guys to hang out with, and I'll play Magic with them any day of the week, hands down. And then Sunday, I was invited to play with the Commander Crew guys, which is Corey, Eddie, and Chris. again, another Chris, from the Commander crew, and they had a guest on who is Anomaly, and she's a newer content creator for Magic, does a lot of TikToks and blowing up Twitter at the moment, and she's really cool to hang out with, really, really fun to play Magic. We got to play against her Chatterfang deck, which she kept apologizing for how many squirrels she had on the board, and that was fine because I love Chatterfang. I can verse Chatterfang deck any day of the week.
So you're saying that she was going nuts?
She was absolutely going nuts. So I believe those games are going up on YouTube. So check those ones out when they go up. And again, I'll come back and I will put the links in the show notes below, and I'll shout it out everywhere. So we will have some gameplay again for you guys to check out. And then that was it. That was huge. I think in between those two stream games, I actually got to create, write, edit, and upload a video of our own. So if you want to check out our content on YouTube, you can do that at Commander@Arms on YouTube. And we just did a brand new Tiamat deck tech. So that is basically Dragon Tribal. Go and check that out if you want dragons. It's got the Dragon in there and the Scion of Dragon and any other big old famous dragon that I could think of to put in the deck, as well as keeping it cohesive and making it fun to play against in all probably mid to maybe slightly higher plays of tiers of play, I should say. Here I am getting my words all mixed up.
That's right. I had a really bad I misspoke very bad in our stream game on Saturday with the Command the Cause. I was trying to say that I really liked Jake's deck, and I said that's a nice Jack Dake. And
Jack Dake. And that's on the internet forever now, Paul. So we're going to move on now to the last part of our upkeep trigger, and that is our play of the week. Paul, what was your play of the week from Saturday?
Whew, man, I've played so much Magic over this weekend. I'm having difficulty actually remembering anything specific. But I do have to say that me getting Possibility Storm and Dovescape on the battlefield at the exact same time, with a Pyrohemia in play, well, I didn't have the Pyrohemia, but it happened to be on the board. That was pretty sweet. Pretty fun, not gonna lie. Almost got that Maze's End win. That was so close. I needed 2 more turns.
I think everyone was okay with the Possibility Storm, but it was the Dovescape on top of that was like, okay, you're either going to counter the first thing that you play, or you're going to counter the thing that you possibly like Possibility Storm into, and then be like, have a feels bad, is where you kind of grew a little bit extra hate and threat assessment from the rest of the board that kind of made you become the first target to go out because it was just too difficult to deal with.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course, because you didn't care. You were fine with it. You wanted to make all the 1/1s, but then the 1/1s died of Pyrohemia anyway.
I didn't care about the 1/1s. I wanted to win with Maze's End.
You almost got there. You were how many? Like 6 out of 10?
2 turns, James. 2 turns, because I would have gotten a Guildgate with Golos on the next turn.
Oh, you were 2 turns away. Okay. Maybe like a propaganda or a ghostly, some sort of pillar fort effect would have been cool. Then you wouldn't have died to I believe you just died to swing damage, didn't you?
Yeah, I got swung at with many squirrels and zombies and whatnot.
Seems bad, but also seems great at the same time. My play of the week, I am not actually going to tell anybody this week because it's in the videos. So go and again, check those videos out and you can tell me what my play of the week is. Spoiler alert, if Corey puts out the Taser video, it's definitely in the Taser video. So go and check that one out. I'm going to tell Corey he's got to make the Taser video now, the Taser game into a video, because that's where I really shine. Anyway, let's get into the main phase 1 here. We're going to just go through and we have a couple questions here. When I say a couple, we've got about 15 questions. Some of them are from Twitter. Some of them we made up on by ourselves, but we are going through some of the questions we've seen from newer players coming into Commander or just even coming into Magic in general. So the first one is...
But before we get into this, I do want to say, for credit's sake, that a lot of these questions actually did come from Anomaly, who James played with. He mentioned just this past Sunday, and honestly, it put into perspective for me a lot of the information that we take for granted as enfranchised Magic the Gathering players. You know, when you've been playing for a while, these are the kinds of things that you don't really think about. It's kind of instinct to you. And it made me realize that, like, hey, we haven't actually talked about this yet. Maybe it's something we should do. Maybe it could be a recurring thing because, you know, there's new players literally every single day. And this is just useful information to have. So I didn't want to interrupt you, James, there. I just wanted to, you know, give credit where credit is due.
No, you're good. I was about to give credit where credit is due, definitely. And as Paul said, if you have any questions that you don't hear on this episode of the podcast and wanted to be featured in a later episode of the podcast, hit us up on Twitter at CMDR@arms and tweet at us, and we'll grab all those questions and we'll put them together in a Google Docs and we'll start answering them, and they'll become a script for the show and we'll get them answered on the show here. So the first question we have here is, if a card says return creature to the battlefield from graveyard, does that count as casting the creature / a spell?
The answer to this is no. That's the TLDR of it. But more specifically, you target a creature as part of casting that reanimation spell, whatever it may be. So the returning of that creature to the battlefield is actually part of the resolution of that spell, meaning that while it's targeting that creature in the graveyard, all you're doing when it resolves is bringing it from the graveyard to the battlefield. It never enters the stack, which means that you are not actually casting that creature.
Which means if you needed to respond to the creature before it comes out, you have to respond while the reanimate spell is still on the stack before it resolves.
Next up, is commander damage separate from other damage?
Yes and no. So when a commander deals damage to you, you reduce your life total by that amount as usual, but you also got to keep track received by any individual commander, since 21 damage from a single commander results in that player losing the game. Note that, I mean, Partners is pretty big in Commander Legends, and it was also pretty big in 2016 Commander Precons, I believe. Those commanders each track their damage separately and do not deal damage together as a single entity.
Right. So that means if somebody has like a Tymna and Thrasios deck, if Tymna attacks you and Thrasios attacks you, you have 2 damage from Tymna and 1 damage from Thrasios. You do not have 3 commander damage from that player.
Yeah. Most importantly, definition on that one. So the next one is basic and non-basic lands permanents.
Anything that stays in play on the battlefield is a permanent. So this includes lands, creatures, enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers, and even tokens. Whether or not those tokens are copies of anything, tokens are permanents because they stay on the battlefield once they hit the battlefield. So that means tokens of artifacts. It means all your goblin tokens, zombie tokens, whatever the case may be. Now, does overloading Cyclonic Rift get through Shroud, such as Shroud granted by Lightning Greaves?
The answer to that one is yes. So because Shroud and Hexproof say that they can't be targeted, overloading a Cyclonic Rift is not actually targeting that permanent. It's doing a blanket, what we like to call a blanket effect. So it's just saying that every single non-land permanent on your opponent's side of the field gets returned to their hand. So because you're not specifically targeting that permanent, it gets past Shroud and Hexproof. The same is also true for board wipes, because they're not single-targetedly removing that creature or permanent.
Right. Generally, we refer to these effects as global effects, which is a perfect segue into our next question here.
Is an effect considered global if it only targets an opponent's board state?
An effect is considered global as long as it does not target any individual spell or creature or player. So an overloaded Cyclonic Rift, borrowing from the last question, Ingaruk's Wake, an overloaded Vandal Blast, these are all considered global effects despite not actually harming you at all. I assume that this question comes up a lot in the context of a permanent having like protection from a color or a card type, like protection from instants or protection from red, for example. These will generally still be affected by global effects. Like if a Mirran Crusader, which has protection from black and green, is on the battlefield, it will still be destroyed by Ingaruk's Wake because it is not targeted by Ingaruk's Wake and it's not being dealt damage by Ingaruk's Wake. Just a quick aside here as a special exception to this, Blasphemous Act, while largely considered a global effect, mainly because it is pretty much a global effect, if a creature has protection from red, it will not actually take damage from Blasphemous Act.
And that was pretty relevant in my very first draft of Daretti when I was playing it when I first started, because I had Blasphemous Act, which is fantastic sorcery, and then I had Akroma's Memorial, which gives protection from red. So I turned what seemed to be a global effect into an asymmetrical board wipe, where it only affected my opponent's creatures, and I got to keep everything.
If someone tries to bring a specific spell back from their graveyard with like a regrowth or something similar, and you play an instant that exiles their graveyard, do they still get that card back before exiling the rest of them?
No. That one's kind of easy to answer. It's really short too. But no, because the targeted creature will no longer be in that zone upon resolution of the spell will actually fizzle and won't resolve at all.
Yeah, so the way this works on the stack is somebody casts, I'm just going to say regrowth again because I already said it. Somebody casts regrowth targeting, I don't know, a mountain in their graveyard. You cast a spell, they say, all right, I'm targeting this mountain in my graveyard. I want to bring it back to my hand. You cast a spell that exiles their graveyard. Choose your favorite one. It doesn't matter which one. Your spell will be on top of the stack, so you will exile their graveyard, and then when Regrowth checks to see if that target is still in the graveyard to return it, it won't be there, and then Regrowth will just be put into the graveyard. It will have no effect.
Can I use Rhystic Study's triggered ability when it's targeted by a removal spell before it goes to the graveyard?
Rhystic Study is a triggered ability, which means that it will go on the stack as soon as something is cast that would trigger it. So if somebody casts Naturalize to destroy your Rhystic Study, Rhystic Study will trigger because an opponent casts a spell. They will choose whether or not they want to pay the 1 mana. If they don't, you draw a card. If they do pay the 1, then you're sad. But either way, you will get that trigger regardless of whether or not Rhystic Study is being destroyed. And more importantly, you will get it before Rhystic Study is actually destroyed. So if you happen to draw a counterspell or whatever, you're in luck. Again, another small aside here for something that's a little more niche, but comes up somewhat often in Commander. If an opponent casts Crowson Grip, which is a 3-mana instant that destroys an artifact or enchantment and has a mechanic called Split Second, which means that no abilities can be activated, non-mana abilities can't be activated, and other spells can't be cast while it's on the stack. You will still get your Rhystic Study trigger, because, like I said, it only prevents activated abilities and spells from being cast. But since Rhystic Study is a triggered ability, you will still get that trigger, and your opponent will still have to choose whether or not they want to pay the 1 mana. Does a creature die when it's sacrificed? And does that affect abilities that trigger when a creature dies?
I feel like I really wanted to answer this one because, as everybody knows, my favorite deck is Teysa Karlov, and that is a dies trigger Death Harmonicon deck. So yes, dying by definition means anytime a creature goes to the graveyard from the battlefield, basically, yeah, that's what it means. Like whenever it goes from the graveyard to the battlefield, it's dying, which then would cause things with death triggers to trigger, and those death triggers could be Blood Artist, you target opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, Zulport Cutthroat, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, or Skull Clamp, you get to draw 2 cards. So this one actually did come up when I played Teysa on Sunday with Anomaly, so I just thought it was fitting that I got to answer this one. The only difference between being sacrificed and being destroyed is that a sacrificed creature cannot be regenerated, which is a whole different mechanic which comes usually on an activated ability of another creature or the creature itself. So the next question, Paul, here is, how many times can I use a creature's mana abilities each turn?
This question I expanded upon a little bit, because the original question, which I'm actually pretty sure was also from Anomaly, was specifically about mana abilities, but I wanted to expand it to include all abilities. So a creature's mana ability, or any abilities for that matter, can be used or activated as many times as you can pay its cost. In the case of mana-producing creatures, most of the time, it's just going to be tap. That'll be the cost. This is the case for like Elvish Mystic, Bloom Tender, and things of the sort. This isn't always the case. There are a few creatures in Magic's history that they have mana producing abilities but don't actually have tap as part of the cost. Bog Initiate is 1 generic mana to add a black to your mana pool. Prismite is 2 generic mana to add a mana of any color to your mana pool. But, most of the time it'll just be tap. So this means that if you have a way to untap a creature that taps for mana, you may use that mana ability again. There are a few ways to do this, and by a few I mean tons of ways. There's like Intruder Alarm, there's Kiora's Follower, there's one that just got printed in the D&D set that I'm not going to take the time to remember its name. But there are several ways that you can do that. Some abilities do have restraints on when you can use them and how many times you can use them. For example, a lot of the cards that have been printed in like Strixhaven and D&D, they say like this triggers only once a turn, or you can only activate this ability once during each player's turn. You can only activate this like during your upkeep, blah, 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 blah. But unless one of those conditions is explicitly stated on the card, you can assume that an ability can be used as often as you like, anytime you want, as long as you can pay its costs. And if you're ever doubtful about whether or not you can use an ability when you think you can, just do yourself a favor. Look on Gatherer for that card, look at its Oracle text, and just make sure. Just, double check yourself.
And just to like kind of flesh that out a little bit more, Paul, for newer players, what is Oracle text?
Oracle text is most of the time what is printed on the card. But literally what it means, Oracle text is how a card should be worded to work within Magic's rules. It is basically like, for example, the card, what's a recent card that was Oracle texted? I'm just going to use Bolas the Citadel, actually.
I mean, Soul's Fire has been one it's actually received an errata because it originally said target creature or player, but now I believe it says any target.
Yeah, that is a good example. I'm going to use Bolas the Citadel just because, I already mentioned it. Bolas the Citadel, as worded, says, and I actually have to pull this up here just to make sure I'm not screwing it up. As worded, it says, you may play the top card of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its converted mana cost rather than pay its mana cost. Now, a few things have changed on this card, namely converted mana cost is now mana value. But also, they have actually Oracle texted or errated all cards that say you may play the top card of your library to you may play spells from the top of your library and you may play lands. They have actually separated that into 2 different phrases. So that's just a little like baby example. Some Oracle texts are more extreme. Look at the Oracle text for like Chains of Mephistopheles.
Yeah, that like reworded the whole card. Like it went from like Chains of Mephistopheles went from being one card to a completely different card now.
Or if you actually want a side-by-side comparison, look at the Arabian Nights printing of Oubliette and then look at its printing in Double Masters. That would actually be a good example.
Yeah, that is actually. And because they were trying to figure out how they were going to make Oubliette work in consideration to modern day Magic.
Right. All right. Are there ways to remove Planeswalker emblems?
Now, when we were presented with this question, I wasn't sure how is going to be the easiest way to explain this to a newer player or someone who doesn't quite understand emblems, because like we said in one of our last questions about permanence, it's not exactly a permanent because it's not on the field. The emblems that you get are just like a reminder to say, hey, you have this effect. So in that case, emblems are quite tricky. So stay with me. And if you don't quite follow this, I'm happy to expand it on Twitter. But they are not entities in the game. They're more like buffs or like a curse. Some of them are on players, some of them are on yourself. As such, they cannot be interacted with in any way currently. We haven't got any ways printed at the moment. The only ways to remove an emblem from the game at this point in time are to either eliminate the player that has the emblem attached to them or restart the game via Khan Liberated's ultimate ability. It's also important to note that if an opponent's Planeswalker gives you an emblem, such as Chandra Awakened Inferno, which I believe the emblem is at the beginning of your upkeep, this emblem deals 1 damage to you, eliminating the player or destroying that Planeswalker will not get rid of those emblems. That emblem will be with you until you are no longer a part of that game.
Which sadly means you did.
Yeah, you died. You either got milled out infinite comboed out, or your life total just hit 0, or you took 21 points of commander damage. So lastly, we have, is this Dark Ritual floating mana that goes away at end of turn, or does it stay?
I'm going to expand this from like just Dark Ritual to include rituals in general, which rituals is just a term to describe instants or sorceries that add mana to your mana pool. So Dark Ritual, there's Cabal Ritual, there's Rite of Flame, I think is what it's called.
Rite of Flames is one, yep.
There's Pyretic Ritual. There's a ton of them, right? When something adds mana, whether it's a land or an instant or a sorcery, that mana will stay in your mana pool until you either spend it to cast a spell or activate an ability, or if you are passing through phases. So, for example, from main phase 1 to combat, or from combat to your second main phase. There are some cards that add mana that specifically state it does not empty as phases end. So a good example of this is Savage Ventmaw, which has seen some talk lately, so that's why I'm mentioning that one. But unless a card has that exact wording, and trust me, if it does that, it will have that wording very explicitly stated on it, you can assume that it will empty after the current phase or the end of the turn. So, Crewfix, God of Horizons, another good example. Mana will empty after phases pass. So when you go to from your main phase to combat, you lose any mana that you were floating. When you go from your upkeep to your draw step, with a card like Braid of Fire or something like that, that mana is gone. When you go from draw to main phase 1, wow, I don't know why I couldn't think of that. You lose the mana that's in your mana pool.
All right. So with all that out of the way, we're actually going to pass through our combat phase. So we're going to pass into our combat phase from our main phase 1, and we're going to lose all of our floating mana from Dark Ritual. And we're going to go and hear a message from our sponsors right now. Welcome back from that ad break. We're going to move through to our main phase 2 now. And we're going to get some more questions here. These are a little bit more complicated. So kind of stick with us. We will explain everything as best as we can so that everyone listening to this episode can kind of walk away with a little bit of extra knowledge on how some of the more intricate parts of Magic work. So the first one here, Paul, is what is the difference between mana value and mana cost? How does this affect X spells?
Every question, by the way, before I answer this one, that is in this section, I came up with on my own based on things that I've had other players ask me or things that I've seen players get confused with. So hopefully this provides a little bit of valuable insight for everybody else out there as well. So mana value is how much mana you actually pay to cast a spell. Mana cost is what is actually physically printed on a card for its casting cost. So whatever you see, on the top right, or if you're playing with a future side card, maybe it's in a weird spot. We'll just say the top right. As an example of this, and just to use the most recent set as, most people are probably familiar with that since it just came out. Druid class and Rogue class, both enchantments from D&D Adventures Beyond, or Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, sorry. They both have mana values of 2, again, because what you pay to cast them is 2. You pay 2 mana total. However, Druid class has a mana cost of 1 and a green, while Rogue class has a mana cost of blue and a black. For spells that contain X in their mana cost, X is assumed to be 0 anywhere except exactly the stack. Again, using D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms as an example, Long Rest, which is a green card from the set, has a mana cost of X, green, green, green. So while in your library, hand, graveyard, or exile, its mana value is just 3, because you assume X is 0. On the stack, though, the mana value would be 3 plus whatever you paid for X. So if you paid 2 for X, the mana value would be 3 plus 2, meaning 5. Tokens have a mana value of 0 at all times, regardless of what the token is. However, tokens such as those like 1/1 goblins generated by Krenko Tin Street Kingpin and the 2/2 zombies generated by like Field of the Dead, they have no mana cost. Tokens that are copies of other cards have the mana cost of whatever they copied. So, for example, a token copy of Blood Artist would have a mana value of 0, but a mana cost of 1 and a black. And this comes up a lot because people love playing Theros gods in commander decks. And those tokens, for example, would count towards the devotion of that god. What is an alternate casting cost? And how does that compare to an additional cost?
All right. So, an alternate casting cost, as the name implies, is a cost you pay for a card instead of its normal mana cost, which you'll find in the top right-hand corner of the card. The most famous or perhaps infamous card of this is Cyclonic Rift. We did mention it at the start of the episode. Cyclonic Rift has a mana cost of 1 and a blue, in which case you return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. You do, however, have the option of paying 6 and a blue, in which case you return all non-land permanents you don't control to their owner's hands. Only one alternate casting cost can be applied at a time, meaning you have a Cyclonic Rift on top of your library with a Bolus of Citadel out. You cannot pay 7 life to overload it, because you have to pick either one or the other, so you're using the Bolus of Citadel as an alternate casting cost to pay life instead of casting it for the 1 in the blue. The same is true as if you have As Foretold with 2 counters and a Cyclonic Rift in your hand, or if you cascade into Cyclonic Rift. An additional cost, again, somewhat implies by the nomenclature, is a cost you may pay in addition to the mana cost. Perhaps the most popular examples of this would be kicker and buyback mechanics. Since additional costs are paid in addition to the mana cost, you may pay additional costs even if they have already paid an alternate cost. For example, if you cascade into Capsize, you can cast it for free, and you may still pay the additional 3 for its buyback cost and return it to your hand upon resolution of the spell.
I wanted to specifically mention this because I have seen so many people, I'm part of a Facebook group for Commander, and I've seen so many people ask about, oh, if I cascade into Cyclonic Rift, like, I'm just going to overload it for free. And it is actually something that comes up so often that I think it would be an injustice to not at least, like, glance upon it in this episode. So if you have any further questions about that, please, feel free to reach out to me, or, maybe an actual judge. I'm not really a judge, but I just, I like to think I know a bit about the rules.
Wait, you're not actually a judge? You've been lying to me this whole time.
But yeah, just don't be afraid to reach out, especially if you're a newer player, and ask, because, people, for the most part, are pretty friendly when it comes to learning about the game. I know I definitely am, and I let people take back things all the time because, either they misunderstood how something works, or they didn't see something that they probably would have if they had been playing for longer. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, don't be afraid to reach out for things like this, because even though other people might make you feel like it should be intuitive, it's not.
Yeah, I feel like none of Magic is, like, intuitive at all. Like, I mean, you'll kind of get knowledge as the more you play, you'll get knowledge on everything. And even as answering some of these questions, I was going through and answering, and Paul's like, well, let's explain it this way, because you don't want to assume that they know that knowledge or that one. So we kind of expand upon it again. And, like, I was like, oh, let's just jokingly not, like, type up a slight, small little maybe answer to what these are, just so we don't, misconstrue some of the information, and everything in this episode is 100% factually correct. But we're going to move on now to the next one. And that is, how do I know if something is a replacement effect? And what does that even mean?
A lot of Commander players learned about the replacement effect via the old, and it feels weird saying that, but the old Commander rule, where instead of putting your Commander into any zone other than the battlefield, you may return it to the command zone instead. That rule has changed somewhat, to better assist commanders that care about things dying. But basically, a replacement effect is something that literally replaces a specific or a certain event occurring. This means, of course, that it replaces that event entirely, meaning it never happens in the first place. So, as an example, Rest in Peace replaces any instance of a card entering a graveyard for any reason with it being exiled instead. This means that if a creature dying would cause something to trigger, that something, whatever it is, will no longer trigger. Replacement effects are, for the most part, worded pretty much the same way, using terms like instead, or when a card would blank it instead, like when a card would leave the battlefield, exile it instead. So generally speaking, any card that involves a replacement effect, it'll be pretty obvious that it is a replacement effect. Feather, the Redeemed, is another example of this. Feather, when you cast a spell that targets a single creature that you control, you instead of putting it in your graveyard, you exile it instead. And Feather actually uses the word instead on the card. So if you're ever confused about whether or not something is a replacement effect, try to look for keywords like that, and that should help you identify when you're dealing with a replacement effect or not.
Yeah, Rest in Peace is one of those high priority targets I have to get rid of when I'm playing Teysa Karlov, because it quite literally turns my deck off. If I can't get death triggers, I can't play Magic. There's nothing else that I can do in that deck. To make attackers, I have to have my non-creatures die to make token creatures to swing in with Teysa to gain life and deal damage, and then, yeah, it's a nightmare. So, Rest in Peace. It's a really good card against death trigger decks, I guess.
One thing that I didn't write down to mention, but I should mention, if you have 2 or more different replacement effects to apply that would happen at the same time, you get to pick which one to apply. Just to provide a couple of examples of this, if you flash back a spell targeting like Feather, for example, since I already mentioned that, they both Flashback and Feather have triggers to exile that card on resolution, like because it would go to the graveyard, but you're going to exile it instead. But you get to choose which one you want to do. So with Feather, you get to actually exile that card with Flashback instead, and then return it to your hand at the end of the turn. This is also this became very popular when Obsidat Ghost Council was in Standard, because there was a deck back then that used Whip of Erebos and Obsidat. And Whip of Erebos says that when that creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead. Obsidat has a trigger at your end step to exile it. So since they're both trying to exile that card, you get to pick which one you want to apply instead. All right, and last but absolutely, certainly not least, one of the most dreaded questions. Not really dreaded, but it's a question that's kind of difficult to answer. How does the stack work? And James is going to take this one away.
Yeah, I am. I'm going to try my best to explain how the stack works, so that not only do I not get confused, Paul doesn't get confused, and most importantly, you guys don't get confused. So, like Paul said, it's a very difficult question to answer in general terms, but the stack operates on an LIFO basis, which is last in, first out, which means that the last spell or ability to put on the stack will be the first to resolve its effect, while the first spell or ability will be the last to resolve. So basically, the easiest way that I learned how to do this was to literally put the cards on the table and then flip it upside down and then start by resolving it that way. In Magic, the stack can be responded to so long as there are no cards preventing players from doing such, i.e. Teferi, Time Reveler, or any split-second cards, meaning that you may let certain parts of the stack resolve before you wish to take action. Once a player casts a spell or uses a non-mana ability, priority passes in turn order. So once priority has passed back around to the player that cast the spell or activated that ability, it resolves. There is no further opportunity to interact with the stack until that player casts another spell, activates another ability, or passes through phases. Certain things called special actions do not use the stack, which, like Morphs, is a special action, which came up in the 2019 decks with Cadena, the Slinking Sorcerer, and they cannot be responded to either. Such as playing lands or rolling dice on rolling the planar dice in a plane chase game, which doesn't often come up in our I guess Plane Chase would be a variant formation of Commander. Note that activating fetch lands are activated abilities of lands and not actually playing lands themselves, as such may be responded to by other players because it's not a mana ability, it's a non-mana ability to go and pay the 1 life, crack it, and sack it. Players have no priority during the untap step either, and there are various other nuances to the stack and manipulations of it thereof, but these things come up with time and experience. And I hope I didn't confuse anybody, and I hope you all kind of stayed with me on that one. And again, that's a very hard question to fully wrap your heads around. It does come with just playing more and more Magic with more and more people. If you need any more explanation on the stack, don't forget that you can tweet at us at commanderatarms on Twitter. Paul and I will always reply. Or if you jump in the Discord server of ours, we're always happy to run through a slight simulation to kind of show you how it all works.
Yeah, I mean, James is lucky; he gets to have me on a personal hotline. Just shoot me a text. Hey, Paul, like how does this interaction work? Oh, okay, well,
it has come down less and less as I've kind of grew as my own Magic player. But again, we were playing once a week at BAM when I first started playing, and then with the addition of Spell Table and Discord and being able to play online through webcam, I was playing more and more Magic, and more rules interactions came up, and I was like, I think I was texting you daily about how does this work? How does that work? You know, if I have XYZ, does ABC happen? And I think you just got really up. It's like, I'm so sick of answering these questions. That should have been a light bulb moment that we were like, hang on a second. We should have done this episode maybe about 6 months ago, but we're getting to it now.
I never get sick of answering questions like these. Honestly, it's very cool to me that, you know, there's so much to the game that, you know, James mentioned Anomaly was actually taking notes during the game. You know, it's like studying for a final exam or something. I know to some people that might seem like too much for a game, but like, I think it's so cool that there's so many nuances to this game that it actually really challenges somebody's brain in its entirety to truly like play the game to its full effectiveness.
Yeah. And I mean, those notes are things that she can go back and read later and be like, oh, that worked with that. And then can move that information into other aspects of the game and be like, oh, well, if those 2 cards are worded these ways and interact these ways, then why don't these 2 cards do that? Or this should work. And then that's kind of the gears are then turning in not just her brain, but in our brains, and everyone else listening to this is kind of like, oh, well, then if this works and that works, and maybe you can put together your own little like 4 or 5 card infinite combo that you're just like so happy to play, and kind of seeing like really cool interactions and synergies. Actually, one of those came up that you kind of missed in the old Gnawbone deck, Paul. It came up on Saturday, and that's the thing, is even with us as experienced as we are, we sometimes overlook the little 2-card interactions, and that was Incubation Druid and Rishkar Padima Renegade, because Incubation Druid says it can tap for 3 mana if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, and also has an activated ability of 3 and 2 green to, I believe it's Evolve? Adapt, sorry, and it gets 3 +1/+1 counters. But if you play the Rishkar Pradim Renegade and then give it a +1/+1 counter, it can all of a sudden tap for 3 mana.
Yeah, I mean, it was so like I always forget that card just cares about having a counter on it. It doesn't care that it adapted, and for some reason it was just so ingrained in me that the card needed to be adapted to tap for 3. But you literally just need a counter on it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So for 3 mana, I got an extra 3 mana out of it, and on turn 3, I think it was, I was able to play Old Gnawbone. I mean, I played it ridiculously early. Anyway, that's not the point of this episode. This point of this episode was to just address some of the questions, concerns that we've seen or we've heard from newer players. And that's it. So we're going to move through to our end phase now, and we're going to start doing our cleanup. I'm going to, you guys know what we usually do here. I'm going to tell you all to go and check out us on Instagram and Twitter at CMDR@arms. If you ever want to come and play Magic with us on a Friday night, or just want to hang out and say hi, you can do that on our Discord server. The link will be in the description below as well, but it's just Commander at Arms on Discord. I'm not sure if it's a searchable server as of yet. I think you have to have like 1,000 members before you become searchable. Anyway, go check out the YouTube channel. If you're not on the YouTube channel already, go and check that one out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave comments in the comment sections on all our videos. It helps us with the algorithms. Show us with your friends. Go to your LGS and be like, hey, check out these guys. They're Commander Arms. They do really sick deck techs. They unbox all the brand new product that comes out if we can get our hands on it. Availabilities may be a little bit hindrant to that. And yeah, just go and check that out. I'm really starting to love making video content, and if I can make more of it for you guys, and if you guys love it, then I'm happy to keep and producing more of it. We have our TCG affiliate link. So if you want to shop online and get cards delivered straight to your door while still supporting LGS, you can do that through our TCG affiliate link, tcgplayer.com/commander-at-arms. If you want to wrap a Commander Arms logo across your chest on a super soft Bella canvas shirt, you can do that by purchasing our merch shirt in the show notes below. If you want to become a patron and support us directly, you can do that at patreon.com/commander-at-arms. We give everybody a shout out at the start and the end of the episode. You also get a little added bonuses in our Discord server, and you get our unconditional love. And with that, Paul, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
As always, if this is the first and last episode you ever have or ever will listen to or watch of Commander at Arms, me and James still really appreciate you doing so. It means a lot to us that you took the time to sit here and listen, even if it was just for a few minutes. It really, it means a lot to us. If you did happen to like what you were listening to, it would also mean a lot to us. If you would go ahead and just share our name around, go to your play group, go to your friends that like Magic the Gathering, say, hey, I've been listening to these really cool guys, Paul and James. They're over at Commander at Arms on YouTube, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. Just get our name out there, help us grow, because the more people that we get to talk to, the better, because I love interacting with people. I also do want to give another special thank you to Anomaly for the inspiration for this episode. And I would also kindly ask that you follow her on Twitter at ANOMOLEE1, the number 1. She's also on the TikTok, so if you put a tick to the talk, go ahead and give her a follow on there as well. And yeah, that's about it.
And with that, I'm James.
And I'm Paul.
And you've been listening to the newest episode of the Commander at Arms podcast. Peace.
See ya.